Hey art nerds, in my last video, Character Design 101, we discussed a list of different things to keep in mind when designing your character. One of those that we mentioned was shape language, and we're going to talk deeper into that topic today. Now, a character designer's first job is to communicate a character's purpose to the audience. In order to do that effectively, it's important to be very deliberate in the decisions made as an artist. Being able to communicate a particular idea can be tricky and it requires more effort than most people might expect. Take a look at this simple triangle. Do you feel anything for this shape, any kind of emotion? The figure is not exactly fraught with emotion, yet one can feel things about it that you don't feel for other shapes. For starters, it isn't huggable. And why is that? Okay, that's because it has these points on it. It also makes one feel very stable. Why? Because it has a flat, wide, horizontal base. It's not likely to be tipped over. It also gives a sense of balance, with each side of the triangle being equal, but also being able to put a line down the center of this triangle, and everything's pretty much the same on both sides. Now, if this triangle was sharper, it would feel nastier as a shape. If it was flatter, it would feel more immobile, that you weren't able to move it. And if it was an irregular triangle, it would feel kind of off balance. Now, with any form of communication, familiarity and mastery over the language affects how we're able to get our point across. The greater our mastery of the language, the better we'll be able to communicate. So, for example, color has its own language, as does line, texture, value, etc. In this video, we'll be specifically discussing shape language. Now, simply put, shape language is using shape to communicate meaning. Different shapes provoke different reactions within us, causing us to associate things we see with certain feelings or meanings. Now, there are three primary shapes, just as there are three primary colors. The primary shapes are the circle, the square, and the triangle. Each of these shapes has strong associations psychologically with certain meanings. For example, the circle is associated with positivity and femininity, the square with physicality and masculinity, and lastly, the triangle with movement and sharpness. We're going to go a little bit deeper into each of these shapes with a few examples so you kind of see how these play out in an actual character's design. First, we have the circle. The circle evokes thoughts of peace, kindness, softness, safety, and wholeness. These are things that we generally associate with femininity. It can also represent things like emptiness, loneliness, magic, and mystery. Circular shapes can be used to make a male character feel kind, soft, happy, or even weak. Next, we have the square. And squares represent physicality. It represents things like stability, dependability, discipline, strength, and reliability. It is the more masculine of the primary shapes. It also represents things like boredom, stationariness, and stupidity. Blocky shapes can also be used to make a female character feel strong, independent, or disciplined. Lastly, we have the triangle, and the triangle is neither masculine nor feminine. It represents movement and deviation and sharpness. The more extreme the angle, the greater the effect. For example, villains are commonly designed with severe angles because those angles make the character feel far separated from masculine, feminine, or heroic traits. The deviation from an ideal or a comfortable personality. In contrast to blocky or circular shapes, triangular shapes can make a character feel severe, unstable, and dangerous. Now, we also have contrasting shapes. And what we have here in my example is we have two different characters made with two very different types of shapes that help communicate two very different types of people. Notice how the blocky angular shapes of the male character and the circular shapes in the female character emphasize the contrast in their idealized masculine and feminine traits. Being aware of the distinctive meanings that are attached to different shapes makes it easier to analyze design choices that other artists make. Here are three variations on a design. each one using one of the primary shapes as the base for the choices that are made. Notice the way that the feel of the character changes despite the fact that the proportions, pose, and expressions are the same. As with primary colors, the primary shapes can be altered and combined in myriad ways. These combinations can communicate more complex meanings. An absolutely square character is going to communicate something very specific to your audience. That character is likely to feel masculine, set in his or her ways, and not terribly bright. Most characters in a good story will have more complexity to them than one type of shape can adequately capture. By adding some complexity to the shape language, you add complexity to the character. Shape is one of the many art languages that we can use as a tool to communicate. The more we learn about the different ways that visual media can communicate to audiences, the more effective we'll be as designers. Good luck and have fun designing with shapes in your characters.